The costs and consequences of capital punishment, which is also known as the death penalty. We're going to be speaking today about why it is so controversial, all the consequences that come with the death penalty, why it's been around so long, and what we can do about it, what we can change, and which policy we can put into place to remove the death penalty. The history of the death penalty. So, the death penalty has actually been around for quite some time and has been a form of punishment dated back to the 1600s. The most common form that we would see prior to the 1600s was hanging, and this would happen in front of groups, hundreds of people, and the criminals would be hung in the gallows for everyone to see, whether they had lied or murdered or stole. This was the form of punishment. The first recorded federal execution actually happened on June 25th in the 1700s, 1790. The first man that was ever executed, his name was Thomas Bird, and he was sentenced to death by hanging. He actually had killed a man on the high seas, and that's why he was executed. Here we'll speak about the different forms of capital punishment. Some of these we do not use in modern times, but they have been used before. So lethal injection is the main form of capital punishment that we use today. I've already spoke about hanging. That was used in the 1800s. Electrocution is still used today. Firing squad and the gas chamber. Death row. What is death row? Well, death row refers to incarcerated persons who have been sentenced to death and are awaiting execution. Historically, death row was a slang term that referred to the area of a prison in which prisoners who were under a sentence of death were housed. 2,500 prisoners are facing execution in the United States, which means that 2,500 prisoners are sitting on death row today. How much does this cost? Well, enforcing the death penalty alone in Florida costs them $51 million a year. And this is $51 million above what it would cost to punish all first-degree murderers with life in prison. According to the Palm Beach Post, Based on the 44 executions Florida had carried out since 1976, that amounts to a cost of 24 million for each execution. So it is costing a lot of money for prisoners to not only sit on death row, but to also carry out this execution. Moving on to botched executions. So capital punishment is cruel and unusual punishment. So I say this because not every execution is done properly. And according to the Death Penalty Information Center, they state that between the years of 1980 through 2010, 3% of those executions were botched. So 3% of those executions were done incorrectly, and the individual that was being executed was tortured. And the most recent botched execution was Kenneth Eugene Smith. So this happened on November 17th, 2022, and he is from Alabama. He was sentenced to the lethal injection. So Mr. Smith sat in the death chambers, strapped to a gurney for over 4 hours, waiting for his execution, and his death was to expire at 12 o'clock. The nurses had already given him his first half of IVs, and they decided at 11:21 p.m. that they didn't have enough time to finish the execution. So not only was Kenneth strapped into a gurney for 4 hours, but he'd also already been given his first half of lethal injection, and they decided that they were not going to finish the execution anymore. So his execution would resume the next day. When it comes to the death penalty, not only do we have to worry about botched executions, but we also have to worry about wrongful convictions. Wrongful convictions happen all of the time, and this can even happen during the sentencing of capital punishment. Since the year of 1973, at least 190 individuals were wrongly convicted, which means if this individual makes it through the death row and is executed, an innocent individual is being executed for a crime that they did not commit. If mistakes and false sentencing is made prior to the conviction of the death penalty, innocent individuals are being sentenced to death for a crime that they did not commit. The costs of capital punishment. So the death penalty sentence roughly costs 8 times more than a case that is non-death penalty related. The average death penalty costs about $620,932. That runs the United States about $11.5 million a year. So if we were to abolish capital punishment, this would save the states and the government millions of dollars a year, and it would save a lot of time on appeals for those who are sitting on death row and so much more. The death penalty and its failure to deter crime. According to the Death Penalty Information Center, the murder rates in states that do not carry out the death penalty is lower than the states that do carry out the death penalty. In the South, they carry out 80% of the whole United States executions, and somehow still have the highest murder rates. In a recent poll of 500 police chiefs nationwide, 50% of those police chiefs said that the death penalty does little to prevent crime because criminals rarely think about the consequences of their actions when engaging in criminal activity. In conclusion, the death penalty is a very controversial subject, and for good reason. For those who are for the death penalty, they may argue that the death penalty provides justice for both the family and the victims, and it allows our society a peace of mind that the criminal who committed those crimes will never walk the streets again. Although these are all very fair points, research shows that the death penalty goes against our Eighth Amendment and is a cruel and unusual punishment. The death penalty is costly, and our country could save millions of dollars a year by abolishing it. There's more than enough proof that the death penalty does not deter crime and prevent further crime from happening. Giving high-profile criminals life in prison without parole would keep criminals off the streets and provide a severe punishment to those who deserve it. By abolishing death penalty, the United States could save over $100 million a year. There would be no incidents in sending innocent individuals to death or botched executions, and the justice system could still keep dangerous criminals off the street by giving them a sentence of life in prison without parole.